Okay, so we are on Unit 2, Lesson 4, Algebraic Reasoning. And actually, this is going to be the last lesson in this unit. We are going to not be covering Lesson 5. What I want to do is I want to complete the unit here. Once we are finished with this lesson, you will get a review, or you'll work on the review. And then once you've gone through the review, you're going to notify me when you're ready for the test, the unit test, and I will give you that unit test. I'm making the unit test a digital version, which is going to be all multiple choice. So just let me know when you are ready for that test after you have finished this lesson in Checkpoint. So this lesson talks about algebraic reasoning. And in this lesson, we are going to use algebraic properties to help us solve equations. And this is something you did basically all through Algebra 1. So you've used these properties. All we're doing today is using these properties and notifying, which property we're using when we solve an equation. So the addition property of equality says, if I add the same number, C, to both sides of an equation, it doesn't change the equality, okay? It doesn't change that equation, okay? Subtraction property says, if I subtract the same number from both sides of an equation, it doesn't change that equality. Same for multiplication. Multiplying by the same number does not change the equality, as long as that number is not 0. And then division property, dividing both sides by the same number does not change the equality unless that number is 0. And then substitution property says, if A equals B, then I can replace B with A, or A with B in any equation or expression. So basically what you're going to do is you are going to be solving equations and then just justifying the step with the property of equality that we used. So in this example 1, solving this equation, what I would do to solve this equation is I would want to get the variables on the same side, meaning I would either move 3x to the other side or negative 4x to the other side. Personally, I would like to move negative 4x to the other side by adding 4x to both sides. If I do that, the result is 7x plus 2 equals 23. The reason I wrote that, the reason I was allowed to write that, is the addition property of equality. And I want you to write that. That is how you justify each step. You do the step, and then you write the property. All right. Now, I didn't physically show adding 4 to both sides. You can do that, but what I'm just showing here is the next step and then the property that I used. So next, in my head, I'm thinking I will subtract 2 from both sides. If I subtract 2 from both sides, this equation becomes 7x equals 21. The reason I could write that, the subtraction property of equality. And then finally, to solve, to get x by itself, I would divide both sides by 7. So that would make x equal to 3. So my final step, I divided. So I use the division property of equality. So just keep in mind that I know you guys know how to solve equations, but the idea is that you are solving the equation and telling me the specific properties of equality you're using in each step. So I'd like you to do the next 2 examples kind of the same, or the guided practice the same as I did example 1, and then check with me once you're ready. So good idea to pause the video, work through them, and then resume the video when you're ready to check your work. Okay, so to explain this set of questions or set of examples, for number 1, I moved 11 to the other side by adding it to both sides, so that's the addition property. I got 6x equals negative 24. I divided both sides by 6. That's why I wrote the division property. Okay, so addition first to both sides, then division on both sides. In number 2, I moved 10p to the other side using the subtraction property. I got negative 12p minus 9 equals negative 17. I then added 9 to both sides, so that's why I wrote the addition property. And then finally I divided both sides by 12 using the division property. And then in number 3, I moved 5z to the other side by subtracting, so I used the subtraction property. From there, I subtracted 39 from both sides. That's why I said the subtraction property. And then finally, to solve, I divided both sides by negative 10, so I used the division property. So it's not just solving the equation, it's solving and justifying your steps with properties that we accept as true. Okay? So next, I'm just adding one property into this, and that's the distributive property. So this just adds a step to our examples. So in example 2, I'm going to simplify the left-hand side. The left-hand side of that equation becomes negative 35w minus 40. So my justification for simplifying that, I used the distributive property. Use the distributive property to simplify that side. From there, it's just like the previous examples. I would add 40 to both sides, so this would become negative 35w equals 70. The property I used there, I added to both sides, so I used the addition property. Okay, I used the addition property. And then to finish this out, I would divide both sides by negative 35 to get negative 2. My justification for that, I use the division property to solve that. Okay, so it's showing your steps and then justifying your steps with properties. So, example 3. Example 3 has us solve a word problem. So it says you get a raise at your part-time job. To write your raise as a percent, use this formula, P times the quantity, R plus 1 equals N, where P is your previous wage, R is the percent increase as a decimal, and N is the new wage. We're going to solve this formula for R, okay? And it says, what is your raise written as a percent when your hourly wage increases from $7.25 to $7.54? Those are going to be important numbers. So we are finding R. We are given P, we are given N. So from this, I can say my old wage P, my previous wage, is $7.25. My new wage is $7.54. So to write out this equation with my new values, I'm going to write this as 725 parentheses R plus 1 equals, and I said N was 754. So my justification for this is the substitution property. The substitution property. I substituted out P and N and substituted in the values for them. So for this, I'm going to simplify the left-hand side. It becomes 725R plus 725 equals 754. The reason I could do that was the distributive property. To continue solving this, I would subtract 725 from both sides. So that's 725R equals 0.29. The reason I did that, I subtracted, so that's the subtraction property. And then finally, I would divide both sides by R, or by 725. So I'd get R equals 0.04 The reason I can do that, I divided. So division property. So it's all about writing the steps to your problem and then justifying your steps with properties, okay? So to round out this first video, I want you guys to try the guided practice and then check in with me to see that you did it right, and then you can move on to the next step, okay? So I'm going to give you a few seconds to pause the video and try these, and then start the video back up when you are ready. Okay, so there's kind of a lot going on here, so I'm going to highlight a little bit just to help kind of keep things straight. So in number 4, I distributed on the left-hand side, so I justify that with the distributive property. I subtracted 42 from both sides, so that's the subtraction property, and then I divided by 9, which is the division property. For number 5, I simplified 6 times 2 minus b using the distributive property. I combined -10 and -6. That's just combining like terms. So that's not a property I listed, but that's combining like terms is this process I used to do that, right? And then I used the subtraction property to subtract 12 from both sides, and then I divided both sides by 16 using the division property. So that's how I solved those two. In the next one, I first defined area was 952, height was 56. So I used substitution to replace those values. I divided both sides by 56 using the division property, and then I multiplied both sides by 2 using the multiplication property to get rid of that 1/2. So a lot of stuff, but a lot of it's review. So I just want you guys to know how to identify those and solve equations while justifying your steps. This is a very important skill. It's a skill we already kind of have. So hopefully this feels like review, and I know it seems tedious to write out the steps, the reasoning behind the steps, but there's a reason behind that, okay? So I'd have you move on to the next part of the lesson and then come back to video 2 for the last few examples.